That's what we got from the Prime Minister. It's a strong advisory. It's a COVID-style restraint that the Prime Minister is exerting citizens to put in place in daily life. To put this in context and to debate whether this is precaution or emergency, let's speak to our panel. Experts joining us tonight, Jitendra Bhargav, former Executive Director at Air India. He's author of The Descent of Air India. He's going to decode the impact on the travel sector, on aviation as well. We've got Ajay Dua, former Union Secretary in the Ministry of Commerce and Industry, joining us in a moment. Madhavi Arora is already with us, Chief Economist at MK Global. She's joining us to break down the macroeconomic implications of this call for restraint. Aditya Saraswat is Senior Vice President at Rystad Energy. He's joining us from London, helping us track the energy markets and the crude dynamics that is actually driving this shift in the Indian economy. Also, for the HR perspective, Aditya Mishra is with us, Managing Director and CEO at CLHR. He's with us to assess what this really means for workplaces, what it means for consumption behavior going ahead from here. But Madhavi, let me ask you, when a Prime Minister is asking citizens to cut fuel use and defer gold purchases, avoid this foreign travel and revive work from home, you consider this proactive economic management, or you think it's a signal that there is deeper stress coming?
It's actually both, Vikram. See, India has been also a laggard in terms of these restrictions. If you look at Asia, rest of Asia actually started putting movement restrictions and some, curtailment in commercial usage of energy much before India actually even suggesting that. So we are actually way behind our Asian peers who are also, energy guzzlers. And possibly, they could be partly on account of, certain, timing constraint for the government. But I think what they're suggesting, is actually, if you look at from the larger national interest, of course, is making sense because we don't know how protracted this energy crisis could turn out to be. The world has already dipped into their reserves. Of course, there are still reserves in the world order that we can dip into, but definitely the longer this war sort of stretches, the more the pain economies like ours will have to bear. So there's nothing wrong in preparing for the same. As of now, this is just it was more like a public appeal than any kind of national constraint or public tightening that has happened. So
So you're saying we are preparing. You're saying we are preparing for what could get worse in times to come. Ajay Dua, do weigh in on this. From the industry side, you worked in the Ministry of Commerce. Tell us, when the messaging is save foreign exchange, reduce imports, you consider this a temporary advisory or an early signal to prepare for prolonged global disruption?
Thank you for having me in this discussion, Vikram. I think what has just been said, that several measures of austerity, of tightening the belt, needed to be taken once it was clear that the war in West Asia is there to stay for a while, and it's not a temporary or a transiting kind of event. But for certain reasons, including I will be upfront, including the ongoing elections in 5 states, probably the government didn't want to take some of the more restrictive measures, including making use of the price mechanism for cutting down demand for certain things. The Prime Minister yesterday in Hyderabad has alluded to a whole lot of measures which need to be around. They need to be there, in fact, if you ask me, for a long time, and not just momentarily. But I would say that these need to be backed also by regulatory measures, including letting the markets decide what should be the price for the goods for which the supply has been disrupted. The demand isn't coming down, so let the two be allowed to be matched by the market
regulatory forces. You're saying regulatory plus market forces need to act together at a time like this. As far as the government is concerned, the signaling, how absolute is that? Is that a signaling to the regulators as well?
I think so. The government is, what the Prime Minister has stated is that, look, things are not any longer normal. I'd like you to go back to certain constraints which you had accepted during the COVID from 2020 to 2022. The time has come when we should revert to those. And at that point of time, you would recall, Vikram, some of them were regulatory changes saying you can't do this, you can't do that.
Yes.
Similarly, what I'm suggesting is, or what I make of the Prime Minister's yesterday's listing out of those 11 measures, if you broadly speak, look at it, they come to 11 or 12,
Yes.
is that there is need for the government to cut down, move in this direction. And in moving in this direction, I'm appealing to you. But if it happens that in the next few days there isn't much of a move forward, then I expect the government to start making use of the measures at its disposal,
Right.
as well.
So you think of this as the first step, as it were. If you were to talk about the austerity measures and get specific, Aditya Saraswat, India is importing more than 85% of its crude. Hormuz is that choke point, that is the trouble area. Now, if disruptions persist, how vulnerable do you think India is today compared to the past oil shocks that we've had?
No, I think over the recent crises, the single most structural vulnerability we have is the import dependency and the stock covers we have. So just to quantify this claim, every $10 per barrel increase in the prices adds another $14-15 billion in annual import bills. And that widens the current account deficit by 40 BPS over GDP as we speak, right? So over the last 30 years, this vulnerability hasn't changed anything structurally, but it's really positive to see our 500 gigawatt of renewable capacity plans. We have already crossed 200 halfway mark, and it is also there were some signs already emerging leading up to this announcement. Last month, we have seen the Petroleum Ministry directing the PSU oil marketers to look at the contingency planning and the supply chain flexibility there. That was not only just a rhetoric, but it was an operational measure leading up to this announcement. So all in all, we are, as you rightly pointed out, more than 85% of our we are dependent on these imports. As much as we can cut short our oil dependency, it will help us to be resilient against these shocks in the future. Work from home, however, doesn't create enough dent because we are largely driven by diesel-driven logistics, jet fuels, and other industrial feedstocks. That, again, if you cut down on those feedstocks, then that it plays and flirts around with our growth and GDP.
So you're saying work from home is not going to make a substantial impact?
No, because it's a passenger vehicles and that has a very limited share of our overall demand. It's largely the trucks and the daily transportation of your logistics, jet fuels, industrial feedstocks. That has the lion's share of your demand. And if you start constraining those feedstock, then it impacts your overall industrial growth and GDP. So it's a very, very initial step to try and position and do some sort of posturing
by the messaging. Yes. To try and curtail it through simple messaging. And that's how it's starting, like two of you have said. But before I go back to that macro picture and talk about the impact on GDP and ask Madhavi, Aditya Mishra, on the ground, since we are talking about work from home, can corporate India realistically today pivot back to work from home after spending 2 years pushing employees back to offices after the pandemic?
No, Vikram, it's going to again create some bit of a disruption. Corporate India, after a very long period of protracted efforts, has been able to get the employees back to office in large numbers. But this kind of a measure is going to create some disruption. However, considering the national security of our international reserves and all of that, this is a welcome move in that sense. And maybe many employees would like to go back to their hometowns and work from home. So the kind of balance which was achieved in terms of hybrid work environment is going to shift a bit. But in my mind, the major changes or the impact can be produced when the consumption can be slightly tweaked. For example, Honorable Prime Minister has said that we should do carpooling.
Yes.
So similarly, can the e-commerce companies, supply chain companies do some pooling, more and more of pooling, while some of them do, but can they do more and more of pooling? And can the citizens, the number of times that they order items of this quick commerce type, the number of times that some households order, can they reduce that and bring all these materials together into one order so that you save some fuel?
Yeah.
And things like this are to be thought through. School, transport of the kids and the teachers and the staff, that consumes a lot, that consists of a lot of traffic in our cities, whether some of that can be rationed. So some of these innovative methods have to really come into picture. And this carpooling as a method that Honorable Prime Minister has said,
Yes.
can be done for multiple other things.
Well, we talk about carpooling even when you don't have, this kind of situation. But that is in general good for the environment and good for the planet. But Madhavi, since we're talking about crude, if the prices of crude stay elevated and the import bill, which is already at $775 billion, comes under pressure, then what is going to hit us first? Is it going to be the inflation? Is it going to be further depreciation of the Indian currency, which has been substantial? Or you think our growth is going to get hit?
So it will happen in a conjunction. I mean, it will be a process wherein you will see all of these variables actually move in tandem with each other. FX is obviously the biggest move that we've seen so far because that's a more open segment of the external sector. But I think in terms of growth and inflation, that will largely be the function of as to how the pain is distributed between OMCs, government, and the consumer. As of now, what we're seeing is that the consumers are largely out of this equation. The pain is largely borne by OMCs and now followed by the government of India when they took up the excise duty cut.
Yeah.
So as of now, I think a consumer is not in the picture. So the consumer price inflation may not necessarily increase.
Yes.
Wholesale price, obviously, you will see a price shock playing out because the producer price inflation will be actually much more pronounced than the consumer price inflation. So we'll see where, how much and when the government actually increases the pump prices for us to see a reflection in CPI in the direct fashion and indirectly, of course, with a lag. On growth, again, it depends on how much burden sharing is happening between government, PSUs and the consumer. As I said, consumer is currently out of the equation, but I think ideally speaking, in a scenario where the energy cost looks to be more prolonged in nature, more pronounced in nature, consumers should be also bearing a portion of it. We are a welfare state. Definitely, but we are not a socialist state. So I think to that extent, I think the consumer would eventually be a part of this equation, which will imply that the growth impact would again be a function of how much fiscal hit the government is taking on its book and how much they're actually curtailing versus, planning to spend it out or slip on their fiscal at this point in time.
We were just talking about the states,
Madhavi. Inflation. $85 per barrel on an average, which we'll see a maximum pain coming in the first quarter. We are still hopeful that, mid-year onwards, you will actually see this sort of streamline much better. So we are still playing $85 per barrel for the average, which gives us 6.5% growth story at this point in time. And inflation, more in the likes of 4.6, 4.7%.
Right.
This does not include the agriculture shock that we may face because of bad.
And we talk about the fertilizer bit as well. But Mr. Bhargav, since Madhavi is alluding towards the kind of hit that the consumers might have to take, and many of the advisories are towards the consumption side of the story, specifically calling out foreign travel over here. So how seriously do you think the aviation sector is going to take this? Could Indians actually pull back on overseas travel in a meaningful way?
They will have no option but to pull back or defer their travel plans. Considering that ATF prices are at a very elevated level, the fares have gone up. Many airlines in the world, not just India, have cancelled flights. Air India announced about 100 flights cancellation because you can't operate or meet the operational costs if you keep operating at these fares. And India is a price-sensitive market. Affordability of fares is an important thing. So airlines have conventionally been selling tickets at par and making modest losses, etc. But when you are in a situation which you are currently in, you simply cannot operate flights. So it has, in fact, automatically come into the airline that the number of flights being operated, therefore the consumption of fuel has automatically gone down because the flights are being operated are less today.
Correct.
But to allude to this, to the COVID times, etc., is not kind of thing for the aviation industry, because when does a passenger travel? When he has a trigger for some business meeting, some social engagement, weddings, sporting events, etc. So at the moment, since the triggers are very much there, those who can afford will travel. Give airlines the right to club flights. There is no point in airlines operating multiple flights and flying at 50-60% load factor. Let them go up to 80% load factor with a proviso given by the DGCA that higher load factors should not necessarily translate into higher fares, because you have the bucket kind of system in aviation industry. As you get on to the less number of seats being available, the fares shoot up. So DGCA must moderate it, say, look, we are allowing you to cut down your operation flights so that you can cut down on fuel consumption. You are more efficient, more productive, and the nation's priority need to be kept before your own personal commercial
So like
interest.
Mr. Dua was saying, you think DGCA as a regulator needs to put down the strictures immediately or wait for stronger guidelines from the center?
No, immediately. For example, DGCA has a lot of regulations which are pro-passengers at the moment, that you penalize airline should you delay a flight beyond a certain time. Now, if you continue to hold those kind of rules, regulations, it's a burden on the airlines. Give airlines the flexibility of clubbing 2 flights up to a certain time limit and say, look, this will be allowed, so that the number of flights operated are productive. Government airlines do not have to rush to the government for financial aid, and we know quite a few of our airlines are on the verge of collapse because they simply can't afford less number of passengers traveling because of elevated fares and higher operational costs.
True. Mr. Dua, India still this consumption-driven economy. So when you're talking about the Prime Minister's signaling for restraint from gold to travel that we're talking about, can it coexist with the need to keep demand alive in the economy?
I think so. The Prime Minister has talked of, say, unnecessary travel, weddings, but the middle class being held outside the country because that's become a fad. Gold, which is not necessary, why should it be allowed to be imported? Similarly, if you can make a particular thing within India, make in India possibility is there, why continue to import it? I am of the opinion that the war, which has disrupted certain supply chains, and in our case, many more, because we are an import-dependent economy for the 3 Fs, the fuel, food, as well as fertilizers.
Yes.
We need to be able to get ourselves down to accept the situation that for whatever reason, we've had it good for the last 3 months. The situation cannot continue this way for very much longer.
But then this route that we are taking, Madhavi, perhaps you can come in on this. Crude, gold, edible oil, fertilizers, together they account for a significant share of our imports. So if households then pull back, does it stabilize the macro picture for us? But, you know, on the other hand, you might have weakening demand on the ground.
Correct, Vikram. That's the idea in the end, right? You need to curtail demand given the supply constraint that we're sitting with, else there's a price impact which is visible. So we don't necessarily have a current account problem at this point in time. Of course, gold share in the total imports has gone dramatically up in the last 2 years, largely owing to the price effect. It used to be like 6-7% of the total import bill. It is now touching close to 9.5% of the total import bill. There's not only just consumption demand for gold, but also investment demand for gold that is playing out. So gold plus oil itself is a very big chunk of your overall import basket. To that extent, I think the aim is to basically cut. I mean, again, as I said, it's not even a policy advisory at this point in time. It was just more like a national appeal. So we'll see how things pan out. But I think we don't have a current account problem as of now. Whatever supply shocks that we are facing, there's not much that we can do but only curtail demand around that.
Fair
And
enough.
that's the way most Asian countries have also gone ahead, by the way.
And you know, Aditya, from what the Prime Minister has said, he's also nudging EV adoption and reducing import dependence. Is this crisis exposing how urgent India's energy transition really is? Because that's been the need for a long time. Now, that entire transition, if we can expedite it, it's really going to make things much easier. But I don't know how much can be done.
No, certainly. I think it's certainly this sort of geopolitical shocks are acting as a precise forcing function that justify accelerating energy transition in the country, right? So it's not an ideology, it's a national strategic risk management. EV adoption, both in two-wheelers and four-wheelers, certainly put a dent into passenger vehicles demand. On top of that, the call for public transportation in metro, that also substitutes personal vehicle fuel consumption in a dense urban corridors. And these two alone create a significant dent in the passenger vehicles, which alone cannot create a significant dent in overall demand, but it's certainly a right place to start in a very initial posturing stage.
Fair enough.
And on top of that, this 500 gigawatt renewable energy plant certainly cuts through the stagnant crude and fossil dependent sectors in industrial and petchems where this empowering the power sector to cut through fossil dependent sectors can certainly help us to reduce our import dependence. And that would be the second step where India has to show resilience and eat up this demand dependence in the industrial sector.
So, Aditya Mishra, for all the measures that have been suggested and we are talking about, cutting off the fuel use, work from home, the domestic travel, buying local, which one, in your opinion, is most practical and can make an immediate difference?
I think reduction of import bill is the major focus that the Prime Minister is trying to achieve. So whether it is about converting into EVs or carpooling or the gold, reducing the gold consumption and some of these things, I see there is an opportunity here for our domestic industry in renewables, for example, maybe the GCCs as an example, and some innovative startups to come in if government can support some of these policies on a little longer term horizon. I think most effective is going to bring people together by this national appeal. And if some policies are formed to shape this national appeal into action over a longer period of time, rather than just one-off announcement and hoping that some results will come.
Well, that's a hope, but this is clearly not a routine advisory from the Prime Minister's side when he himself is asking citizens to cut consumption, to defer spending, to think twice before using resources. It does tell you that the risks ahead are real and possibly prolonged. And this is India now trying to get ahead of a possible global shock, because once it hits, reacting late is not going to be an option. My thanks to my panelists, Ajay Dua, Jitendra Bhargava, Madhavi Arora, Aditya Saraswat and Aditya Mishra. Thank you so much for joining us with your perspective tonight. For us as we are consumers at this time, the clarion call has come in. Now, how much further the centre is going to go in putting down the strictures, that remains to be seen. But it's really going to test the resilience of our economy. It's a piece that we are watching very closely, as indeed I'm sure you are as well. I'm Vikram Oza on The Big Question. Thank you for joining us.